Frankenstein panel. I'm Spike Settenhagen. I'll be your moderator. Let's go down the row and introduce ourselves. My only qualification is that I somehow managed to finally be able to sit with the cool kids. I'm like no expert. I'm just really stoked to be here. So if I start going like, remember when you wrote that one thing that was cool? Then just ignore it. It'll be fine.
Yeah. Pull your mics in close to you.
How about that?
Yeah,
okay.
That sounds
Who
good.
are you?
Hi, I'm David Scull. I'm a film historian and pop culture authority of some sort. And I've written books like The Monster Show and Hollywood Gothic, and I produced all of the documentary extras on the Universal DVDs and Blu-rays. And I also did the behind-the-scenes documentary on the making of Gods and Monsters, which had a lot to do with The Bride of Frankenstein, so we can touch on that if you'd like. But thank you for having me.
Thank you.
Hi, I'm Kelly Dunn. I am a journalist and fiction writer. I write for Famous Monsters of Filmland magazine.
Yay!
I've also done a horror anthology called Mutation Nation, which was inspired in part by Frankenstein. I've written a novel called Beloved of the Fallen, and my latest thing is I've channeled Mary Shelley in a new short story.
Wow.
And she is also my lovely wife, and I am Stephen Woodworth. I am the author of the Violet series of paranormal suspense novels, and more recently of Fraulein Frankenstein, which is my cred to be here. And this book that she that collects her Mary Shelley story. This was a project that started for my blog, in which we sort of recreated the famous ghost story competition that Mary Shelley and Byron and Polidori and Percy Bysshe Shelley had, which inspired Frankenstein. So.
And I'm William. I'm an actor and writer. Mostly have done articles for a lot of the Starlog Press magazines years ago, like Fangoria and Comicfest.
Alright, now let's start talking about everyone's favorite living dead girl, shall we? I'm always curious, what was your first exposure to The Bride, and what was your impression? Let's go down the row here. David?
Start with me?
Yeah.
Well, I had a hard time seeing the Universal films when I was a kid because they just weren't shown on Cleveland television when I was most rabidly interested in them. And so my exposure came from Famous Monsters of Filmland magazine and others. And in fact, the very first monster magazine I was ever aware of was the Bride of Frankenstein film book special. And it was probably the longest, most detailed article about the film that had ever been published anywhere. You know, in 1962, there was no such thing as film studies in academia, and that was all to come. But there it was in Famous Monsters, and every time they did one of these special issues, I figured this must be the best movie ever made. I was wrong about Dracula, which especially has consumed me over the years, which was a disappointment when I first saw it, which is probably why I kept digging into it and burying myself with Dracula over the years. But Bride of Frankenstein is Universal's crown jewel. I mean, it's an extraordinary film, and it's one that James Whale didn't want to make until he could make it the way he wanted, and until he had the clout at the studio with a series of successes to have fun with it. And of course, it's almost a horror comedy. And it was its precursors at Universal were The Invisible Man and The Old Dark House, and you can see Whale cultivating his macabre sense of humor. He didn't really have an association with horror or monsters. It wasn't anything he wanted to do. He worked in the theater. He was an actor and a set designer, and was following one of his stage successes to Hollywood at the beginning of the talkie era. A play called Journey's End about World War I with Colin Clive, and he cut his teeth in the London theater, and he brought a lot of these people to Hollywood. There was a great influx of British and New York talent to Hollywood in the early 30s because there was suddenly, with talking pictures, a demand for actors who were trained to speak, and that's why we were so lucky to get some of these extraordinary people. Karloff was already here, Frankenstein was like his 80th film or something. He had really been toiling, in obscurity. But it's fresh and wonderful every time I watch it. It's like The Wizard of Oz. It's a film that just seems so perfect that you wouldn't want to change anything. It has little beats. It has rhythms. I can't say enough of it, so I will.
Well, everything you're saying fascinates me so much because The Bride of Frankenstein was kind of the film that put me on the path to a career in horror because I was 4 years old. I saw it on TV, and I think that was the perfect age because I didn't know any of the filmmaking tricks. I didn't know it was made by this total genius, and I was just mesmerized by the magic of it. The music, I noticed, the way it hit all the right notes. I was not frightened by the monster at all. I felt sorry for him. And I think that's why I became attracted to these monsters and these characters on the fringe, because I saw that he was a character with no friends, totally misunderstood, and the way the film, even as a 4-year-old, it hit all the comedy. You laugh at just the right moments, and then suddenly you're like, so just the way it takes you through that whole journey to, you completely understand why the monster needs a mate, and this is the wrong way to go about it, but it's the only way, it seems like. And so, by the time you get to the end and you see the bride, oh, and by the way, I just loved Elsa Lanchester and her little Mary Shelley appearance. So great. But then by the end, you're like, oh, what is wrong? There's something wrong with this bride. It's terrible. I don't know. It made a great impression on me, and that's what got me started.
Well, growing up as a kid in the 70s, I got kind of exposed to the parody of all the parodies of Frankenstein before I worked my way backward to the serious version. So you end up seeing things like Mad Monster Club and Young Frankenstein, which she did an article on, and so when you finally, as an adult, I don't know, I can't remember when I saw the original Bride of Frankenstein finally,